Arirang Special.
Unknowable to most.
Even my children don't know enough of what happened.
Is the cruelty of war's memories.
I saw a lot of damage to people, a lot of casualties, a lot of death.
The war heroes who paid the ultimate price in a country not their own.
I'll never forget any of those people that I got to know there, including an enemy soldier.
Though buried deep in time, there is a reason it must not be dismissed from our mind's eye.
Often I would have a fantasy that maybe he'll come home.
Imjingak. Located on the northernmost point of Tongillo, or Unification Road, it was built for Koreans displaced from the north, who never imagined a war would divide the land and keep them from their loved ones indefinitely. Today, it has become an unconventional tourist site, attracting thousands of visitors each day. If you listen closely, you can almost hear silent gunshots ring through the peaceful park. This past May, a group of family members visit Korea. Held for the second time, the ceremony honors the families of soldiers whose bodies have yet to be recovered from the Korean War.
Will place a wreath of tribute for those who fell during the Korean War.
Despite the decades that have passed, many hold on to an unanswered question. Why did you leave your family to die in a country unknown to you?
I can recall that day when I was 6 years old, receiving the news that you had been killed on October the 20th, 1950, in North Korea. How could it be? I watched my parents grieve, but I had my own overwhelming sadness.
Their faces, restored and framed, are frozen in time. It's a small offer of compassion to those who never got to bury their loved ones at their final resting place.
His sister Brenda May Lott.
The journey is also a chance for family to find the reason for their excruciating sacrifice.
His brother Raymond J. Valentin.
From memory to remembrance, the tribute turns to gratitude.
He was 17 when he went in. He was just 17, just barely 17. And I have grandchildren older than that, and I look at them and I think, that's difficult. And I've looked at so many young Korean faces here, and I think I hope they never have to go to another country. But I hope they'll have the peace that they were doing the right thing, if they do, for something that made a place better. So I thank this government. It makes me want to be a more gracious and grateful person. And so I look at the Korean young people here and think of my brother. I think he would have been proud to have looked up on your beautiful faces. All the
The Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs was created with the mission to address the sadness and pain of these families. During their stay, the special guests are shown Korea's development, a nation that soared from the ashes of poverty. And yet, it cannot be said that the Korean War has ended.
One night, 24 hours after Nagasaki was hit, in August of 1945, three people, two very powerful people, John McCloy and Dean Rusk, and a third military man, divided Korea at the 38th parallel. And they didn't ask anybody else, let alone Koreans. I mean, can you imagine Koreans coming here and dividing the U.S. at the Mason-Dixon line without consulting any Americans? And that was not the cause of the war.
So the 38th parallel was decided as the dividing line. And actually the Soviet forces arrived long before the U.S. forces even got on the peninsula and, in a way, surprisingly stopped at the 38th parallel rather than continuing on and taking all of the peninsula. But eventually U.S. forces got on the peninsula and then met at the 38th parallel.
In the early hours of Sunday, June 25, 1950, the Korean War erupts when the North Korean People's Army dashed across the 38th parallel. Differences in ideology between the South and North culminate in an all-out war. The country is decimated.
What made the Korean War really particularly destructive was the involvement of international actors, first the Americans and then the Chinese. So it was a combination of a civil war and international war, which made it a very brutal and destructive conflict.
A fight between brothers rapidly intensifies into a conflict of global proportions. The United States dispatches forces to subdue incoming North Korean and Chinese soldiers. The United Nations also commits ground troops.
The UN was very new. This was its first big conflict. And as part of that, the U.S. put a great deal of pressure on allies to contribute to the war effort. 16 nations are usually said to have been part of that allied coalition, but really only two or three of them really fought heavily and lost a lot of soldiers, and that would be the U.S., England, the U.K., rather, and Turkey. The Turkish fighters were excellent. There were other smaller contingents from New Zealand and Australia and so on. But I mean, the Thais basically provided an honor guard or something like that. I mean, there weren't many soldiers.
UN troops cross north of the 38th parallel. The arbitrary border becomes a front line to the war. The hope of reunification without force evaporates into thin air.
The international factor is that the major powers involved, the Chinese, the Americans, the Soviets, could not reach an agreement on how to end the war and unify Korea. They tried to reach that agreement in Geneva in April of 1954, but it ended in failure. And therefore, all the sides from the international powers involved have decided that a divided Korea is more convenient than taking the risks of unifying Korea.
Within 3 years, the war reaches a truce. Military leaders of the United Nations Command and the North Korean Army meet at Panmunjom to sign an armistice in the presence of the Chinese People's Volunteer Army.
Well, the Korean War has been referred to as the Forgotten War, which is very unfortunate. World War II is very well known. It was a huge effort by a large number of nations, resounding victory over fascism and imperialism. The Vietnam War, I believe, is more well known in the U.S. because it was so controversial. In the Korean War, we succeeded in repelling the communist invasion, in regaining South Korean territory. Unfortunately, because of China's intervention, we were not able to reunite the Korean people. But it really is a misnomer, though, to call it the Forgotten War. It's really, in a way, insulting to all of those Americans and South Korean and other UN members who fought and died on behalf of maintaining freedom in South Korea. So those of us who work Asia, it's certainly not forgotten. The efforts, the valor, the sacrifices.
More than half a century has passed since the Korean War broke out, 66 years to be exact. And over that time, the conflict that firmed up the division of the Korean peninsula has faded from our consciousness. However, for some in the U.S., the memory of the Korean War is approaching them in a fresh way today. Cedar City in the U.S. state of Utah. Touching the Rocky Mountains, the small city boasts exceptionally clean air. It also has a special connection to Korea. Many young people from here had fought in the Korean War. A war memorial was erected in their honor.
To honor this battalion and the veterans of Iron County and southern Utah of the service that they provided to not only our nation but the nation of South Korea. They are very honored and privileged to serve for the cause of freedom. And they were willing to give up their own lives in defense of your country, which is a great, great tribute to their character.
When they come here, veterans run into their fellow soldier, with whom they served in the 213th Armored Field Artillery Battalion.
And somebody had a beaver kid.
Others have passed on.
Tell all these guys I know. Dirksen flew the airplane, him and Leonard.
The Korean War Memorial stands where the battalion depot once was.
I think since then I've made about 5.
Perusing through the names of their comrades, the men reminisce on the mission that brought them together. The 213th Field Artillery Battalion was ordered into the Battle of Kapong. Their mission? To defeat thousands of advancing Chinese troops. The combat in the dark was punctuated by gunfire, and fierce fighting raged on. Overnight, some 350 enemy forces were killed, and those captured numbered in the 800s.
So many refugees coming down that canyon that night, the speed was just as fast as they could walk. Now, if you got to going faster than that, you'd run over some of them. And there was many women that had 2 and 3 children, one of them carrying, and they'd have little carts behind pulling, and that. It was a very chaotic experience.
Despite the bloodshed, the 213th Battalion of Utah came out of the Kapong struggle without a single casualty. All 600 young soldiers were able to walk back into the arms of their loved ones, and the event came to be known as the Miracle of Kapong.
All survived. Came out of there without a broken nose. Nothing.
Oh. How did you do it, though?
How?
Yeah.
I think the Lord was with us.
And there was a commanding officer who led the team to such a victory. He is Brigadier General Frank J. Daly.
So at that time he was, you can still see the brown hair. And at that time, I think he weighed about 184 pounds. And when he returned from Korea, he weighed 146 pounds and had gray hair.
All white hair.
All white hair. It wasn't gray, it was white. When Dad retired from his military
Frank
career,
Daly was welcomed home
Dad,
with great fanfare and earned respect. But the medals and honors he'd collected failed to guarantee him a peaceful life.
At the front of Dad's tent,
The devoted teacher before the war chose not to return to the classroom.
leadership. Korea, February 1950. Dad having horrific headaches, migraine headaches, and it affected, and so he had to try to take a lot of medication, which has upset his stomach. But he did mention at one time that he felt that those headaches were precipitated by what he had experienced.
Wanting desperately to forget the shock of war. Instead, it became a burden he and his family had to bear. His days were tense in the years following.
I do remember growing up and Dad not sharing a whole lot of information, because whenever we would bring up the subject, he would just say a few things and then it was pretty much dropped. And I think it was because a time of his life that he did all he could do. And
it was horrific.
Yeah, and it was kind of a nightmare with what he went through. But thank goodness to some of the men under him who have given some information. And then his brother, Max Dowling, after Dad died, they had a kind of a little documentary on what had happened in Korea.
It's a nice day, so they kept us busy.
From Cedar City, we drive 3 hours north.
I'd be calling for observing, but
We meet Jack Howell and Richard Howell, cousins who were born and raised in the same town.
St. George area, which is the Korean.
They're also Korean War veterans.
25 years, so I picked up just a few more medals.
Despite their close personal relations, this is an exceptional moment of unpacking their memories of the Korean War.
I saw a lot of damage to people, a lot of casualties, a lot of death, and that's one reason I tried to put most of it behind me. Now, I've talked more about it the last 2 years than I have the rest of my life.
I didn't have the same experience that Jack did, so I have not really tried to try and get it out of my mind like he has done, because he's seen the worst of it, and my experiences there weren't nearly as extent as his were, and so as a result, I don't know. I'm glad that I had a part of it, and I appreciate what they've done, and I'm glad that I was able to help. But I still appreciate having been able to be there, and I have not really tried to erase it out. I'm just glad to have it part of my life and to see the progress that the people there have made. A little scarf that I had made up for Marie.
Richard served in the Air Force while Jack served in the Army.
So we did not
You
wear
had a trophy?
We did. Another one, gold. So they weren't really part of our uniform.
You hid behind.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
This was a patch attached to Richard's jacket.
On her jacket. So communication, it was hard to communicate in those days, and very, very little of it was done. But I don't know, we just involved in our own lives, I guess, and so we just didn't communicate.
Most veterans choose not to recall their war experiences. In the prime of their lives, they answered a call from some faraway country they did not know. They say they don't feel particularly proud of what they'd done. The mission is chock full of harrowing memories. But in recent years, that thought has started to shift.
I'm just very appreciative of having had the chance to play a small part in helping Korea to accomplish what they've accomplished, which is not to my credit, but just a tiny bit, you know, of if you get enough people doing the right thing, then things are going to be good. So Korea's done great. I've never seen a more energetic people than the Koreans to see what they've accomplished in the years following the war, because it was so devastated when we were there that it's just hard to believe what's there now compared to what we left there in the 50s.
Korea's rapid development helps them realize that their sacrifice was not for nothing. On the other hand, there is one veteran who's not shy about his war experience.
Words that I can't help but believe could have been written on the
Albert
heart
Cooper has been working as a
inscribed upon the
radio
soul
DJ now for
of every
14
veteran
years.
of every war. As I stood there recently, my mind went back to that long ago fall day, and I felt the touch of the kind bus driver's hand on my shoulder and heard again his words, "You're home." And my heart today, remembering, responds, "It's good to be home."
Al, that's a beautiful.
I do that on my radio program probably once each year, and hope that kids are listening, that other generations will.
Much life has unfolded since Albert returned from Korea.
If I didn't have somebody watching, I would be able to do it.
But his thoughts and stories remain on a battlefield some 60 years earlier.
One day at the University of Utah, I went to a film showing, and it was done by a traveling professor who had made several trips to Korea. And he told the audience, he said, what Americans have forgotten is that 43 million people live in peace and freedom today because of what you guys did. And you need to remember that. And I told myself that night that I was not going to be a quiet veteran anymore, that I needed to be proud of what my generation had done, and that I wanted other Americans not to forget about it. And so in a way, it slowly began a change in my life. And I decided that I wasn't going to be a quiet American veteran anymore.
Plaques of recognition line the walls. A dog tag from the war, an old 501 bill and medals, items that hold special meaning, including a metal spoon from a countryside family who invited him to a meal.
They had a big container of soybeans that were cooking, and they had some rice. And so they wanted me to sit down and eat with them. And I didn't really want to, but I didn't know how I could say no. So I joined them, and they noticed right away that I was having a real difficult time with chopsticks, trying, especially with the rice. And the soybeans too, I just wasn't doing very well. And I noticed that the mama-san got this smile on her face. And she got up, we were sitting on the ground, and she went back into their little farm home, and she came back out with this spoon. And, you know, I can tell by looking at it, this is very old. And I think this, for them, was a valuable thing that they owned. And so she was happy that I was able to eat with this spoon. And then when it was time to leave, and I got up to leave, she wanted me to take the spoon. And I didn't think I should do that, you know, but I didn't want to offend them either, so I took the spoon with me.
It's private moments like these that Albert cherishes. Spurts of light in the 3 years riddled with death and despair. To this day, he salutes the people he met in a dark, dark time.
I have worked hard to appreciate the privilege that I had to be a part of that effort, to have gone somewhere far away to fight for another people whose names I had a hard time even remembering. But I'll never forget Chow Wal Bin. I'll never forget Mr. Han. I'll never forget any of those people that I got to know there, including an enemy soldier.
Along the vast, cool breeze of the Pacific Ocean is San Diego County. We meet Mary Borovitz, who keeps an orange orchard here. She lives with sad memories of the Korean War.
And we had ducks, we had chickens, I had a little lamb. Mary had her little lamb when I was little. This was before I was 7 years old. And so this felt, in a way, familiar, but sort of way long time ago. Anyway, it just became really very special to be here, and I love being here now. And grapes.
Her father is Arthur Chidester.
Now you know they're really sweet because the birds peck holes them in.
He left to fight in the Korean War when Mary was just 7 years old.
Why did he go to this foreign country that's so far away? What difference? Why was it important?
Mary's questions come from the agony of losing her father to the war, making her family to a soldier MIA.
Arthur A. Chidester was in the United States Marine Corps. He went in 1935, and he served until 1950. It's 15 years. He was born in September of 1913, so he was a very young man when he died, 37 years old. These 3 stars right here underneath the National Defense Service from Korea indicate that that's a very special award. And there's a V for valor underneath this bronze star. It also, the V is for valor. It also indicates that's a very special award. One picture that I just took of that very same location.
To Mary, Arthur was a hero of another kind.
Just like it is for a very long time.
As a young father, he put together an album, scribbling captions along the sidelines.
I just thought it was really precious to see what he did. Wrote down.
From the battlefield, he sent handwritten letters in time for her birthday.
And most successfully, too, according to reports I heard from your charming mother, which is, I certainly miss my father. All the time when I was growing up, even through high school, I never really connected that well with the man she married. It was very hard for me. And often I would have a fantasy that maybe he'll come home. Maybe he'll take us away from all of this. But it never happened.
Living apart from her father, she did not understand why.
And they cut it in several different spots so that they were separated from each other. The group that was closest up to here were able to turn around and come into.
Then one day, a letter arrived in the mail.
It was actually captured on the night. And I keep letters of people have written me letters. 20 January 1954, informing you of the finding of death in the case of your son, Colonel Arthur A. Chidester. This was written to my grandmother. And you see the date on this, January 22nd, 1954.
Arthur's remains are presumed to be in North Korea. Inter-Korean excavation efforts were launched in the mid-1990s.
Some other identifying, piece of brick and brewer's coffin.
But when diplomatic relations between Pyongyang and Washington worsened, they were called off in 2005.
My dad's bones. Well, for me personally, my hope would be that we would be able to get into North Korea and do some excavations and actually find his bones. I don't know if I'll be able to get the bones back of my dad before I die or not, but I'll keep asking those questions, keep attending the meetings, and keep saying we need to try. We need to keep trying. Can't give up.
The South Korean government continues to forge ahead. Seoul's defense ministry invites the families of missing soldiers to Korea.
They've been in conjunction.
They receive an update on search efforts and are invited to view excavated items at Makri headquarters. Coins and boots that perhaps were worn by their loved ones.
자료가 가장 큰 문제인데 그게 바로 2005년도부터 KF2가 국내에 들어왔다 그랬는데 그 팀이 들어옴으로 인해서 그러한 자료를 가지고 와서 지금 미국과 우리와의 유해 발굴상에 문제는 없습니다.
Some 150,000 UN soldiers are estimated to have died or gone missing in the Korean War. A joint task force between the Korean Defense Ministry and its U.S. counterpart takes on the difficult task of locating and identifying the war dead.
매년 30개 개소에 대한 조사 자료를 가지고 와서 우리와 같이 매년 거의 한 6개월간을 합동으로 조사 및 발굴 작전을 진행하고 있습니다.
This past April, 17 Korean War remains were identified and sent back to their families. 15 South Korean soldiers and 2 Americans.
미군 전사자 8천여 우리의 유해가 아직도 가족의 품으로 돌아가지 못하고 있습니다. 나라를 위해 희생된 분들을 기리고 끝까지 책임지는 것은 국가의 당연한 책무입니다.
This event also sets the tone for future personnel accounting missions and fosters continued open dialogue between our countries, facilitating the fullest possible accounting for our missing personnel to their families and our nations.
North Korea, in a state of self-imposed isolation, has for now closed the door on excavation efforts, though thousands of bodies are still believed to be buried there. This as the joint effort between South Korea and the U.S. are showing measurable results. About an hour northwest of Los Angeles lives Robert Morin and his wife.
I'll tell you all about it later.
They are professional quilt artists who actively participate in quilt shows and other events.
Well, did you move right? Yeah, something like that.
Robert Morin returned from a trip to Korea last year as a son to a missing soldier.
The quilting, the stitching on the background that holds. So I have.
The Vietnam War veteran who had harbored deep hurts was moved by what he saw.
On the computer, we uploaded, printed on fabric.
I cannot tell you how much that touched my heart. To think that somebody there cared. I went to the war memorial there. And there were pictures of this in the Korean press, I know. I had no idea that my father's name was memorialized on that plaque on the wall.
Sons and daughters and other family who carried resentment because they never had the closure they needed are hosted by the Korean government as a gesture of gratitude and consolation. At the War Memorial of Korea, they find the names of their loved ones still unrecovered.
The people of Korea were so special to us. I mean, the dignity with which we were treated and the outpouring of respect and gratitude that came from the Korean people And it was so authentic. There was nothing fake about it. It wasn't like their boss said, I want you to go out there and be really nice to those people and smile a lot. It wasn't like that at all. It came from their hearts.
Let me get the Korean and that'll be good.
Moved by the warmth and deep respect they received, the Morins started a special project, using fabric they'd bought at Seoul's Dongdaemun market. Quilts that symbolize the Korean War.
We normally don't work in unison. We typically do our own projects, but we do them in the same room. It's the most solid, tangible way that we could express truly our love and our gratitude for what happened. Since we got back from Korea,
The ongoing project features the Korean flag Taegukgi and Old Glory.
so
That's her square.
all of the other ones are patriotic.
The names of missing soldiers are embroidered along the border.
The back. So this will truly be so everybody's name is on there.
The wounds of the Korean War may have closed, but the scars must still be honored and remembered.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I cannot see the reunification of North and South Korea and then the clearing of all the 60-year-old landmines that are covering that area that would make access to that possible in my lifetime. So I am resolved to the fact that my father's remains will never be brought home. But I'm also okay with that, and I'll tell you why. When I saw my dad's name at the Memorial Hall in Korea, I realized this is his final resting place. And this is truly where he died. It's where his body is, and it's where his memorial is. And things are as they should be.
No greater gift can any man give than to offer up his life for his friends. And that's what every one of us did, whether we knew it or not. We were offering up our lives for the benefit of other people. And that's something that we should not be allowed to forget.
The work is far from over.
Hopefully someday if they let us back into North Korea, we can go there and see to find his remains. But I'm not sure that'll ever happen.
A commitment has been made to see the mission through.
And most important lesson of the Korean War is that such a war as this should never happen on the Korean Peninsula again, and all sides must put as their first priority the achievement and maintenance of peace.
Freedom is never free.
My hope would be that the North and the South will come to some agreement that this is a boundary, and they begin having people go back and forth and take down the walls of fear and hatred and say these are two countries, and now we'll have a decent relationship, not full of fear and worry that the other one is going to attack each other. That would be my hope for Korea.
But hope lives on.